Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the Education Summit with Refound Education. Today we have Kimberly from Star Students who is going to share her perspective on empowering parents and learning. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm always happy to be involved with the alternative education movement. And I know that we've kind of been in each other's circles for quite some time. So this is been a while in the making, but I'm glad to be part of it, as much as I can be. Um, that's right. I'm talking about empowering parents and nurturing lifelong learners at home. So, because I know that everybody has squirrely attention spans these days, I do have a little bit of a visual for people to be able to follow along, because I find that that's often helpful to have a visual aid. So, let me just share my screen here. Perfect. Okay, we can see this.
We can. Looks great.
Yes, okay. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. And I put it on the bigger monitor up here. So if it looks like I'm looking up above at certain times, that's why, because I'm making sure that it follows along with things. Just so that it's easier and it's a little bit bigger for people to see as well. So hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly, as Jeanette said. So this is my little presentation to you guys, just in terms of information and making sure that we're hopefully educating people on the alternative education movement. So the title of this talk or speech or lecture or whatever you want to call it, exciting new foray into alternative education, is Empowering Parents, Nurturing Lifelong Learners at Home, Traveling Beyond the Classroom. So this is going to be maybe 40 to 45 minutes. I always like to give people times because I know I am one of those people that like to always have times. So out of respect for your time and you guys showing up today, this is something that I put together. So we're about 40 to 45 minutes, just a bit of a welcome and an introduction, a brief history of homeschooling, why alternative education of various types is in fact needed, and then what the value is, the value for that and of that. Again, of various types, because alternative education is very broad. It covers a lot of things. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Star Students, which is my business, and how we approach homeschooling and alternative education. Then I have some tips for you guys, 3 active keys to success for parents. And then, of course, a little bit of a conclusion, because a proper presentation has a conclusion. So thank you for joining me today. First and foremost, I do appreciate the time that everybody's taking out of their day to be here, to show up. I know that we are all very busy. I know that there are things that are always going on. So I appreciate that people are here. A little bit about me, just so that you know where I'm coming from. So my name is Kimberly, like I believe I've said, and like Jeanette has said. And one of the things that I always like to start with, people always ask how I got into the business of homeschooling, how I got into Star Students, and how Star Students came to be. So that started quite a while ago. There were some things that happened. I know that people are kind of might understand what I'm talking about around the time of 2020, is actually when I graduated Teachers College. So at that point, I had been teaching for just about 8 years, 8 years, 7 or 8 years at that point. But I just had graduated Teachers College in 2020. And the way that things were dealt with in that time frame, that was what I like to say is the cherry on the icing on the cake of a long, long line of complaints that I had and of concerns that I had. And it was just the final straw or the cherry that I said, no, this is not where I'm supposed to be. Not the teaching aspect of things, but the placement of where I was in a public education setting. And so I opened up Star Students, and that's a little bit of a business history story as to where that comes from. But that's where I'm coming from in terms of the education and the background as to where I come from with having Star Students as a business. So First and foremost, because I know that some people are a little bit confused, and some people, I always get questions, I always get lots of interest about what is the difference between something like homeschooling and or unschooling, and or alternative education, as opposed to traditional classrooms. So I put together a little bit of a chart here so that people can kind of see what the difference is between traditional teaching and alternative education. So traditional teaching, you get the traditional learning environment. Now, when I say traditional, you might think of a classroom, right? Where you have four walls, you have your desks in whatever arrangement. There's one teacher, there's 20, 30, 40 potentially kids in a classroom. They're all kind of in groups or maybe separated, but that's the traditional learning environment that I'm referring to. When you look at alternative education, on the other hand, you're looking at a flexible learning environment. You don't even necessarily have to have four walls around you. You can be outside. You don't necessarily have to have one teacher to 40 children. In fact, you shouldn't. Or one teacher even to 20, or even to, I would say, even to 15. Excuse me, even to 15. That's pushing it. Excuse me. One thing with traditional teaching, you will find standardized curriculum. One thing that you will find in public schools and even to private schools in a large extent, or to a large extent, is that you will have standardized curriculum. You'll have the same books, you'll have the same topics, you'll have the same subjects. And while the subjects necessarily can't necessarily be changed, the books and the topics and the ways in which children are taught should be. And that's, as you notice, in alternative education, you have a highly customizable environment. You've got a highly customizable curriculum. You have highly customizable subjects, and you have highly customizable methods in which you can teach. That's the difference. One thing with the standardized curriculum that I do want to point out, with public and, like I said, even private schools, when you have books that are used repeatedly over and over and over again with these curriculums, some of them have not been updated and or changed or even looked at. The oldest curriculum that I know of as it pertains to Canadian education is something like 2007, I think. No, I'm sorry, 1997. And that's one of the math curriculums in one of the provinces. That is, to me, that's crazy that we haven't looked at a curriculum. We haven't changed anything about the curriculum that we're teaching in 25 years. So that's one thing about traditional teaching that you won't find in alternative education, the difference in the curriculum. One thing with traditional teaching as well, if you notice the next point, we have inflexible pacing. So there's pacing that just kind of goes, and well, if you don't understand it, well, that's too bad. You're going to just have to keep up with the class or get extra help on the side or take extra time out of your own time, whatever. Or on the other hand, if you're gifted and you have things that you want to be able to explore that are beyond your, per se, your classroom grade level, but you can't do that because that's not something that traditional teaching allows for. Alternative education, if you notice, it does. You can have personalized pacing, and that's because, for a variety of reasons, your class sizes are smaller. You can actually cater the education to the student. You don't have to cater the student to the education. Something with traditional teaching as well that I really like to point out to people is low student engagement. When you have a classroom of 20 to 30 to 40 kids, you will not necessarily have low engagement, but it's much more common in a large classroom like that to have students just sit there and stare at you, as opposed to if you're in a classroom that's an alternative education classroom or alternative education environment, shall I say, where you're in smaller classes of, let's say, 5, 6, 7, or 3 or 4, or even one-on-one, you have a much higher engagement level, much higher, because you have a smaller group. It feels like more of an actual learning experience rather than learning as a chore. And the last one I want to talk about, inclusivity. And I know this is kind of a buzzword in the public education space. Traditional teaching methods and traditional teaching in general touts this idea of inclusivity, and we're including everyone. The easiest way that I can explain this and or point this out is in the case of including any and all neurodivergent children in the same classroom. You are not doing them any favors because they all learn differently, even if they're considered to be normal, I guess would be the term, and not neurodivergent. You're not doing these kids any favors by putting them in a classroom where they can't learn to the best of their ability. That is not inclusion. It's not inclusion at all. Like in the genuine sense of the word inclusion, you're not including anybody. You're actually excluding them. On the other hand, with alternative education, because you can personalize the way that you approach children, because you can personalize the type of content that you're teaching to students, that's actual, genuine, authentic inclusivity because you're catering it to that student with their either their neuronormal or their neurodivergent needs. There's no reason for anyone to feel excluded with alternative education because of its very nature. It is so flexible. Okay, so what exactly is alternative education? Just some helpful definitions for people, because I've talked about a comparison of what alternative is to the traditional. Let's talk a little bit about what alternative education actually is. There's many different forms of alternative education, but in general, a definition created by yours truly over here, a form of education that's outside of the mainstream public school system. When I say public school system, I'm also referring to private schools and in some sense charter schools as well, because they are government affiliated, let's say. So when we say mainstream, we're talking about the public, private, and charter schools. Most often, alternative education is outside of those things. And it's most commonly associated with homeschooling. That's a really common one, a really common form of alternative education, or unschooling, which is gaining in popularity, especially since 2020. It's gotten to be huge, unschooling in particular. So the features of alternative education, and we kind of covered these already: personalized curriculum, and I covered some of the reasons for that, flexible scheduling, one-on-one attention or one-on-two, one-on-three, like I mentioned, much smaller groups, right? Real world experiences, you actually get to go and do things. There's much more variation in your field trips, and your field trips are actually field trips. They're not just learning objectives and like, okay, we're hopping on a bus, we're going here, and then we're going to come home or come back to the school. You also, in alternative education, you get genuine parental involvement and control. I don't mean those parent-teacher board meetings where the board sits there and pretends to listen to all of your concerns. I mean actual parental involvement and control with the curriculum, with the teaching, with the methods, with everything. That is true alternative education. The parent, who's supposed to be the primary educator of their child, is involved and helps to shape the curriculum and all of the choices that come along with their child's education. Alternative, next point, alternative education, you're looking at blended forms. Very rarely will you find someone who is participating in alternative education in whatever form that might be, and they're just doing one form. They're just doing one thing, or they're just doing maybe like one main thing. They are always doing more than one. They always have various options. So they've got something for this portion of academics. They've got something for this portion of the real world skills. They've got something for this portion of co-op. They have something for this portion of home ec, right? There's lots of different opportunities. And when you are in alternative education, typically, most of the parents that we deal with anyways, and most of the parents that I speak with, they have many different forms of experiences across the entire spectrum, not just the academic. Alternative education also genuinely prioritizes flexibility and student interests. Definitely talked about that. And there is also a greater investment. This one is really, really important. There's also a greater investment on interactive technology and knowledge. There are many people who I've spoken with, many parents who I've spoken with, who recognize that we are in a changing world. This is now, 2024 at this point. We have seen massive change since 2020. If you think that the world is going to stay the same, and the world of education in particular is going to stay the same in the next 5 years, I would beg you to reconsider your opinion, because we have seen so much change already. Where are we going in the next 5 years? And when you think about that, you want to prepare your child for a world that they're going to be able to cope with, not just cope with, but thrive in. And you don't do that by not teaching them about interactive technology. You don't do that by hiding them away from the world. You have to be able to help them to thrive in this new world that we will find ourselves in, whatever that may be. Jeanette put moving into a cave in the chat. Yeah, exactly. You don't, I mean, if your child wants to do that, by all means, encourage them to go move into a cave. I've tried it. It was great while it lasted, but it takes a certain personality to do that, to go, off grid, live in the woods, like in the mountains. That's great, right? But in order to equip your children to be able to deal with and or thrive in the upcoming world of technology, unless they're going to do that, where they're going to go completely off grid, they're going to go, hide away in the mountains and have a homestead and do their own thing, that's not feasible for most people. And especially, I will tell you from personal experience, especially not on your own. So the point being, you want to make sure that your kids are digitally literate. That is a really big thing that we stress here at Star Students, and most alternative education programs should genuinely stress that. If they are true alternative education, I'm sorry, the internet is not going anywhere. So you either have to learn how to use it so it doesn't use you. So some of the common misconceptions around alternative education and homeschooling, because a lot of people have this idea that, or they have multiple ideas that I would say, and that many people in the alternative education space would say are incorrect. Jeanette, I know we're looking at this and we've had some conversations about some of these things. So just a disclaimer before we start, these statistics are general average percentages across North America. So that is Canada and the United States. They're general average percentages, okay? It's also meant to illustrate the main concerns. So these are not the only concerns, but these are the main concerns of families who choose the path of alternative education, who have chosen that despite these being their concerns. So, I mean, let's start with the biggest one first. Socialization. You can see here socialization, that's about 30%. So 30% of parents, again, average, across North America, socialization is a concern of theirs. That doesn't mean that they're sitting there just complaining about it. They find other ways in which to provide their children with the socialization that public school, I would argue public school doesn't provide any sort of socialization, but they find other ways to prioritize socialization and to make sure that their kids get those other experiences outside of a public school classroom. Next one would be academic quality. Now, this is also a concern of homeschooling parents, academic quality, making sure that your child is academically, not even academically on par, but academically superior to their peers who are in public school. That has a percentage rate of 25%. That's something that 25%, again, on average, of families who choose to homeschool or unschool, whatever it might be, that's a concern that they have. And various families that I've spoken with have various different solutions for that. Again, this doesn't mean they're sitting there just thinking about it. They're actually taking action to solve those problems. Limited extracurricular opportunities. This is a big one for parents who have their kids in sports, or who want their kids to be in sports, or who want their kids to be active. So that comes in at 20% of limiting the extracurricular opportunities. Again, that's not something that is necessarily true in terms of, oh, my kids won't have any extracurricular opportunities. They are there. You just won't necessarily be putting your kids in the public school programs. You'll be putting them into private programs to be able to have to help them and give them those sorts of extracurricular opportunities that they would have in public school as well, if that's the route they choose to go. The next one, parental qualifications. This is what I hear about from parents all the time. I'm not qualified to teach my child. And they don't say it like that, But that is a common misconception, a common complaint or concern that I hear from parents that they're not qualified. And I call that a misconception because I'm of the opinion, of the professional and personal opinion, that you as the parent are the primary educator of your child. You are obviously qualified to teach your child. Now, people will say, but I can't teach math, or I can't teach science, or I can't teach this, or I can't teach that. That is where outsourcing comes in, my friend. As an adult, as a parent, you're not an expert with absolutely everything, and that's okay. Your kids don't expect you to be. They don't expect you to be. You are qualified to teach your child. And if you're not qualified to teach certain academic subjects, you're qualified to make a decision about who is going to teach your child those certain academic subjects. And then the last one here, a lack of structure and discipline. I always have to chuckle when I hear this one because from experience, I will tell you that children who are in alternative education programs are far more structured and far more disciplined on average than children who are in public schools and who are in a public and or private school system in which they have a routine. Having a routine doesn't mean that there's a structure, and having a routine doesn't mean that there's discipline. People often confuse the two. They confuse the idea of routine with structure, or routine with discipline, and they're not the same thing. Okay, so in traditional education, I'm going to go through this one really quickly. But in traditional education, so we have the historical context, you have the traditional system that I've talked about, where you can see from this image here, that's kind of what people imagine when they think of a traditional education, especially with the, I don't even remember what they're called, but I grew up with one in the classroom. Those PowerPoint things that would always come down the boards for the teacher to be able to show whatever they wanted to show. So traditional, but very industrialized, right? Very uniform, very much standardized, right? And I've talked about quite a few of those things already. Historically, that's where that comes from. And the general structure, of course, we all know this, is that it's grade-based and it's an age group system. And again, very standardized, right? You're not allowed to skip grades. You're not allowed, what are allowed to be held back. In some provinces, in some states, they will do that. In others, they will not. Teaching methods is very much teacher-led, direct instruction. I know some of the other speakers today and on other days have talked about the idea of memorization as well. And how memorization is a huge thing in school. You're not actually teaching a child anything when you teach them to memorize. You're teaching them how to regurgitate to you. That's not actually learning. That's just testing their memorization skills. Well, we do that through memorization, through repetition, and teacher-led and direct instruction, which the three of those, teacher-led and direct instruction and repetition, those aren't necessarily bad things. The memorization is something that's a little bit of a challenge. It's not something that we here at STAR students like to uphold. Assessment and evaluation, it's standardized testing all across the board. There's one way to test, there's one way to do things, and that's about it. There's no sort of flexibility in the way that you can evaluate students, and there's no creativity in the way that you're allowed to evaluate them either. And the classroom environment, of course, we're all familiar with the traditional classroom environment, is that you have a single teacher and you have a set schedule. I would go so far as to say you have a set number of students as well, or a set acceptable range of students, I would say. So these are some of the ongoing challenges in traditional education. This is kind of where this conversation is leading, is talking about some of these ongoing challenges. So we have 5 that are the biggest. And I know everybody in the history of mankind especially over the last 5 years, who's paid any attention to the education spectrum and who's paid any attention to the world of education, has so many things to say about all of these things with issues. But in order to keep it brief, these are just the 5 main ones that we think, and there's most of the common ones that people say. Limited time for extracurriculars is issue number 1. Why is that? Well, because you spend 6 hours, maybe not 6, call it 5, sitting behind a desk, doing worksheets and activities and whatever else it might be. You, by the time you finish school at, 3, if you're in elementary, it might be 3:30, then you've got, whatever, volleyball or basketball, some sort of something. Then you've got to get home, you've got supper, you've got homework to do, and then before you know it, it's time for bed. You have very limited time for extracurriculars when you follow the traditional rigid school schedule of being in school for 6 hours a day, or for 6.5, 7 hours a day. And that, of course, doesn't include the rest of the time in transport and getting there and all the other life things that have to take place as well. Issue number 2, and this is a really, really big one that we've seen a rise in over the past 4 years, especially, is a lack of curriculum control. Parents are unable and students are unable to control the curriculum and to control how and at what pace they're learning the curriculum. Simple as that. Simple as that. And that is a problem. That is a problem, because when you're talking about a public education system, it is supposed to be something that the public has control over. Issue number 3, a limited influence on teaching frameworks. Now, I mentioned this before, without getting into too much politics and without getting into too many details about things. In Teachers College, I will tell you that they taught us that we were supposed to teach from 1 and or 2 acceptable teaching frameworks. And if we taught from any other framework, we would be in trouble, to put it politely. So without a huge political discussion or getting into those sorts of politics, let me just leave it at that and say that there's a limited influence that parents have on the teaching frameworks, but there's also a limited influence that the teachers themselves have on the teaching frameworks. Issue number 4, this one is specifically for parents, minimal involvement with educators. That is a huge issue. Now, that is not to say that the educators and the teachers themselves have issues or don't want to connect with the parents. Again, I'm not speaking for everybody over the course of, the entirety of North America. But the fact of the matter is that when you have one teacher for 20 or 30 or potentially 40 kids, but when you have one teacher, even best case scenario, let's say 20 kids, you have one teacher that's responsible for 20 children, potentially more, and they're supposed to give you the same quality and level of service for each parent and for each child. That is impossible, because teachers are one person. They can't do that. And so to place those expectations on teachers is not only unrealistic, but absolutely impossible. And does that mean that either side of the coin is wrong? Well, no. Parents should absolutely expect maximum involvement with educators. Educators, unfortunately, aren't given the flexibility to be able to do that in the public school system. And so it's not that anything is wrong with either side of the spectrum. It's that it's a broken system that is not working in the best interest of the children, period. And then the last one, this is another one that kind of goes along with the idea of a lack of curriculum control. It's a one-size-fits-all education model. And that is something that has been time and again pointed out since the not infiltration, since the inception, I'll say, of public education. It's always been a one-size-fits-all education model, simply by its nature of one teacher and 20 to 40 kids in a classroom. Okay, in contrast, now that we've talked about how public education, ongoing challenges in public education are on the rise and are really not working in the best interest for the kids, let's talk about alternative education. So this is kind of your pathway to personalization and holistic learning. These are the benefits to students. So personalized learning, I've talked about that. Because of the flexibility that you have, you can do that, right? It adapts to each child's unique learning style. That means more engagement. That's why you have such high engagement levels when you are in alternative education, when your child is choosing a path of alternative education. They also understand more. I shouldn't even say understand. I should say comprehend. They comprehend things a whole lot quicker, a whole lot faster, and a whole lot better, because they're in an environment that is suitable to them. There's many emotional and social benefits. I love when people come to me with the concern of my child won't be socialized if they're homeschooled or unschooled. That is a whole other conversation, and we're going to be here for way longer than 45 minutes if that is a conversation that we're having. But suffice it to say, homeschooled kids, unschooled kids, kids who are in alternative education actually get way more socialization experience than other people, than kids who are in public school, because of the fact that they live in the real world. They're not in a factory-like setting for 6 to 7 to 8 hours of their day, doing routine things over and over and over again and repeating the same stuff over and over and over again, because they have supportive and tailored interactions in an environment that's not a stressful environment for the most part. That's not to say that there's not stress put on kids sometimes, of course there is, but for the most part, it's not a stressful environment, as in you must learn this, you must memorize this, you must make sure that this is something that you know for a test. No, we don't learn for the sake of an objective. We learn for the sake of learning. Excuse me. And then the last point, one of the many benefits, but the last point I want to point out here, academic flexibility. You are genuinely preparing your children for the future of work and for the future of this world when you choose the path of alternative education. And the reason for that is because you encourage adaptability and you encourage self-directed learning. You encourage a work ethic. You encourage those family values skills that you hear people talking about all the time, because of the fact that you have that flexibility to be able to do so. Now, in terms of remote learning, I talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation. In terms of remote learning, like I said, the internet is going nowhere until World War III happens, or the apocalypse, or whatever else, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it, if you're ready for that or not, the internet is going nowhere until that happens. You are doing your children a disservice by keeping them away from that, and not that you want to expose your children to negative influences, but you want to teach them how to handle those influences. And part of that is making sure that they're digitally literate and they're digitally capable of not surviving, but thriving in this world. So you have accessibility with online education, because you can literally be anywhere in the world. You could be on a boat, you could be on a cruise ship, just make sure you got a Wi-Fi signal. And we have had students where they've been, they've gone on a cruise, or they've gone on like a vacation to a different country, and they want to be able to continue with homeschooling with their program. No problem, because as long as they've got a laptop and they got a Wi-Fi signal, they're good to go. Which is the lovely thing, right? You can technology integration. I talked about that one. You can digitally prepare your children for this world that nobody really knows what's coming, but you can digitally prepare them for what is. You can have a customized learning environment. Sometimes I don't encourage this, but sometimes you will have students that will show up in their pajamas, or they will need to, grab a snack, or they will need to get something or whatever. I do encourage kids to always, my first question before starting a lesson is, are you hungry? Did you eat something? Right? Because children should be able to eat. People in general should be able to eat when they're hungry. That's not a problem. When you're at home and or out and about, but you're on your laptop and you have your Wi-Fi signal and you're good to go, who's to say you can't eat in class? I don't have a problem with that. Neither do any of my teachers. At all, because the idea is that it's a customized learning environment. As long as you're polite, you're doing what's asked of you, no problem. Flexible scheduling, we talked about this already, different learning rhythms and different schedules, different things work for different kids, right? Some of them work better in the evening, some of them work better in the morning, some of them are like late night owls. I know Jeanette is a late night owl, she's up super late all the time. I myself am more of like a midday sort of person. I like to start my day off a little bit slower in the morning and then get up and get going and organize myself for the day. So everyone's different. When you have remote learning, you cut out all of that extra nonsense with traveling back and forth and being on a specific set schedule. And it is easier all around to be able to be more flexible. Diverse learning resources, because there's lots of different things that you can get. Like I said, the internet's not going anywhere. Might as well learn to use it while it is here. And you can get lots of different resources from the internet, from libraries, from everywhere around the world, because we've got the ability to do so. With remote learning as well, typically you've got a higher level of parental involvement, right? And parents are also able to keep up with their kids' progress a lot easier than, oh, I need to go find that paper and this one here, and I don't remember where I put their report card. And if you have a digitally organized environment, you're much more capable of actually being more organized and being able to be more involved in your child's education. This is something I said earlier. You must teach your child how to use technology so that technology does not end up using your child. And I'm sure there's someone who has said that in previous years. I'm sure there's people who will continue to say it in the years to come. But I'm telling you, that is one of the things that is so, so, so important to prepare your child for the digital landscape of tomorrow and of the next 5 years, of the next 10 years, of the next 20. So talking a little bit about STAR students and about what we do here at STAR students and what makes us a little bit different from other private education companies. We are an alternative we are private. Of course, we're private, but we are alternative as well. So we come in with a personalized learning approach. We make sure that each curriculum is crafted to the child. Instead of taking the child and molding them to the curriculum, we will take the curriculum and we will mold it to the child. That means that we're able to encourage things like inquiry-driven and student-led learning. We like to be able to utilize our teacher resources and our teachers' experience in order to take the curriculum expectations, like I said, and mold them to the child, rather than the other way around, molding the child to the curriculum. We do believe in fostering genuine values and relationships. That includes between our teachers and our parents, our teachers and our kids, myself and parents, myself and the other teachers, and then myself and the students that I teach as well. Because at STAR Students, we like to be able to think of ourselves as a STAR Students family rather than just a business. We don't just a business, because we're doing more than just educating the future generations. So here's some of our services for those of you who may be interested. I will leave all the contact information. I'll get to that in just a second. But here are some of our services. We have 3 main sorts of tiers. So we do provide tutoring services, which can be individual or a group. That is ideal for students who are still in the public education system or whose parents are perhaps looking to move them out of the education system, or for parents who, like I mentioned, have their child in some sort of other alternative education context. So if they're in a forest school, or if the parent is simply educating them, or if there's some other thing going on, but they want to, let's say, rent out a subject, or they want to outsource something that they don't want to teach or that they're not comfortable teaching. So this here is a really good option. This is our tertiary option here for tutoring, which can be individual or group. And so we've got some of our benefits there, but that's how that one works. The second option that we have, this is a really good one for parents who want to DIY their homeschooling experience. So they want to be able to do it themselves. They have the time, or they're willing to make the time to be able to do so. They have the drive and the willpower, and they are willing to make the time, but they just don't know where to start. They just are not sure where the resources are. They don't know what the curriculum should look like. They don't know how to put together a curriculum that is in the best interest of their child. This is an option that we have for people. I find this is really popular with parents who are where typically it is the mother, is the female of the relationship who's doing the educating. or who wants to do the educating. And typically I find that's how that works. So if she, Jeanette in the chat, no lies detected. And that's just kind of how it works. And that's okay. That's fine, because that's how it's supposed to be, really. That women are just kind of more geared towards children and child rearing and all of that stuff. It is true too that most teachers, most teachers are actually female. There's a reason for that gender gap, if you want to call it that, in that world as well. So that is an option that we offer. Yes, you're right, definitely in the younger years, Jeanette. In the younger years, especially once you get into the older years with the high school science and math, then you start seeing more males, right? But yeah, so this is a really good option for parents who want to do it themselves, but are looking for some guidance and looking for some resources, and as for how to get started, right? So we run our coaching programs. They've been quite successful so far. And I think most parents who are in this bracket really appreciate being able to have that guidance, because it just makes things easier. You're not meant to do it alone. This is something that you will burn yourself out over if you do it all yourself, which is the importance of a community. That's one thing that we really stress here at Star Students, is the importance of a community. Then the last option that we have, this is one that is a completely customized homeschooling programs for students. This is for students. So we actually will sit down with the parents, do a consultation, do assessments with the kids, figure out where they're at academically, talk to the parents and the kids about what their goals are, where they want to be, what sorts of things they'd like to learn. And we put together a complete customized curriculum for these children, with the involvement of the children as well as the parents. Now, with that being said, there are some subjects that are probably a good idea to do. For example, math. Your child should probably know how to add 2 + 2. There are certain things in math that you're going to need to know, regardless of what career you're going into, right? So those are recommendations that we would make in terms of essential subjects and essential knowledge that we want to make sure that is hopefully part of that curriculum. But this option here, this first option, this primary option here, is one that is completely customized to the student and to the parents and to the needs of the family. And I find that this one is popular with parents who want to make sure that they're giving their children the very, very best of education that they can possibly give them, because you're looking at a completely customized educational experience. It's not even an educational, it's an educational journey. It's not an educational objective. So our homeschooling programs, I kind of went through this a little bit already, but I'll just touch on some of the basics. So personalized curriculum, like I said, parental involvement and control. Our classes with our homeschooling programs, with all of our homeschooling programs, anyone that we teach, 1-on-1 to 1-on-3. We will do 1-on-4 if it is high school level, if they're high school level, and the kids are emotionally mature enough to handle that. We do not go larger than that, though. You have real world experiences, because we pull teachers from all over the world. We have teachers located all over the world. So you get those real world experiences and those different cultural experiences, which is a really nice aspect. And we do, of course, have a very high focus on technology and on digital knowledge, because that's something we really believe in. Homeschooling coaching. So talked a little bit about homeschooling coaching already, but just a few basic features. So I talked about the guidance that we offer, the support that we have, the resources that are here for you, the flexible scheduling and customizable learning plans. One thing that I find that's really popular with homeschooling coaching is a combination with educational packages. So with either with homeschooling packages where we are doing the teaching here at Star Students, or with tutoring and or homeschooling packages that are on the tertiary level, where we're just teaching perhaps a subject. There's lots of parents that we have in our coaching programs that want to be able to rent out a subject, or that want to be able to have Star Students teachers teach their kids in certain areas and put that together. So that was something that we came up with, actually, that's a new feature of the coaching programs, is that we combined them with the educational packages that we offer with our teaching services. And then the last one here with tutoring and or the homeschooling tertiary packages. So again, accessible learning methods, of course, a supportive learning environment, you will get the same quality of service, regardless of whether you are paying for the homeschooling primary investment or you're paying for the homeschooling and tutoring tertiary investment, you get the same quality. You just don't get the same quantity because we're looking at different packages of what you're being what your hours are being used for. Same structure for classes. We're looking at 1-on-1 to 1-on-3. Like I said, potentially 1-on-4. Of course, flexible scheduling. We do place a very high focus on communication with school teachers if your child is in a public school, or if they're in a private school, or if they have some sort of other educational something else going on. We do place a high focus on that as well. And of course, as with our other programs, we do place a very high priority on technology and on digital knowledge. Okay, so I promised you guys some tips. So here are our tips. We have our top tips for a successful alternative educational experience. So we've got to create a flexible setup. You want to set up a conducive learning environment, first of all. In order to do that, you want to have a flexible setup. You want to make sure you're organized and you have all the equipment that you need in terms of the resources. You want to make sure you also choose the right space because that's really, really important. This second tip here that I would offer is to balance the role of parent and teacher. You have to be able to go back and forth between both. You're not always a parent and you're not always a teacher and you're not always both at once. You want to be able to set clear boundaries around school times, around fun times, things like that, right? You want to be able to embrace a flexible approach. That one I cannot stress enough. You have to be flexible when you're in alternative education. And the last one, you want to be able to seek support and resources because you cannot do this alone. Well, you can if you want to, but you're going to burn yourself out. Jeanette's over here laughing. Yeah, you're going to burn yourself out if you do that, for sure, very quick. Okay, so some final thoughts. I did say that I would leave you guys with the contact information and all of this stuff. Feel free to screenshot this. Feel free to email me, text me, call me, or you can follow me on social media if you're one of those people who likes to look at social media first. I am fairly responsive on social media as well. So by all means, you can choose your preferred method of communication. And I'm happy to chat with anyone who would like to talk. A conversation about your child and about your child's education does not cost you anything. I'll leave that with that final thought. Jeanette, thank you so much.
That was amazing. I love how you laid out everything, like especially with the like traditional, non-traditional, the flexibility, how you fill the gaps. It was amazing. And people really need to hear it because you're right, everything is changing so dramatically. So be sure to call Kim for all your needs because yeah, she can help you with any question marks that you have and give you solutions. And you don't have to know everything. You just have to reach out and start a conversation. So yeah, thanks everyone and look forward to the next session. Have a great day.